Black folks were rich here, basically. They lived very good lives.
Many of them, yes. Yes.
But the high level of home ownership in Greenwood made Tulsa's Black district distinctive.
Now, for some white people, a black person with any wealth, then as well as today, is something that created jealousy.
The events in Tulsa started on May 30th, 1921.
Blacks retreated to the Greenwood district where they set up a barrier at the railroad tracks.
And sort of systematically, building by building, house by house, the white mob would loot and then set things on fire. And by the end of the day, Greenwood was gone, whereas the black population was now being arrested and held under armed guard in internment camps.
I don't even have anything witty to say. I don't have a clever one line. I don't have anything. Just damn.
Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility. Khalil Gibran.
Okay, so today's episode will be on Black Wall Street. What is it? How did it come about? How did it fall? But before we get into that, I'm going to need you to do me one massive favor. And that is like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your comments are appreciated. Your comments are needed. Please comment things that you would like me to cover, speak about, and all you may find interesting yourself and think, hey, why is this not covered on YouTube anyway? However, before I say that, let's cover the elephant in the room.
Wow. Okay. You know what? Here's, first of all, wow. All right. I can't even.
Last week's episode, very controversial. Not going to spend too long on it. But please, I know most people, it's hard to finish an episode. Sometimes you've got other things to do. Sometimes they're bloated. I'm not going to lie. I could have done a better job last week of letting you know what I really thought straight away and explaining it backwards. However, before you put in a disparaging comment, a hateful comment, just think, if I haven't watched the whole episode, have I got the full opinion? That's all I'm going to say. If you want to hate away. I don't mind, but I'll just put that out there. Without further ado, please, let's now focus on the subject at hand. Black Wall Street. And what the fuck happened there?
The Tulsa Massacre was an unprecedented event in American history. It was, simply put, the single worst incident of racial violence ever.
In late May of 1921, white groups attacked and destroyed Tulsa, Oklahoma's prosperous African-American neighborhood known as Greenwood, or Black Wall Street.
You see, Black Wall Street was a name coined by Booker T. Washington, who went through the state of Oklahoma and saw Greenwood town and called it Negro Wall Street and then eventually Black Wall Street. Really coming to prominence in the early 1900s, and in 1921 is where the microcosm of a booming society met the envy and vitriol and hatred of its white neighbors.
57 years after the United States abolished slavery, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma was a surprisingly prosperous slice of Americana. Greenwood's population was comprised of blacks who had migrated there from the South, seeking improved conditions.
As you can tell from these clips, it has many, many beautiful things. Like it said, a black owned hotel by J.B. Stratford, one of the biggest black surgeon at the time, and one of the best black surgeons to ever exist, Dr. A.C. Jackson. And the fruitfulness economically of the town, its bustling economy, attracted migration from many different parts of the state, especially veterans from World War I. Many black war veterans moved there because it was such a prosperous place and good for people that were industrious and showed ambition, which was totally the opposite of what was going on in the rest of America.
This was in stark contrast to other parts of the country, where American blacks were often forced to live in harsher conditions, especially in the Midwest and South, where the sharecropping system remained in place. There, they labored tirelessly on another person's land, surrendering the majority of their crops to the landlord. As a result, they were trapped in debt to white landowners, some of whom former slave owners. When blacks tried to improve their situation, white neighbors often responded with violence, whether individual or communal, and black men who showed ambition were often targets of lynchings. But in early 1921, life was anything but bleak in Greenwood.
However, that uniqueness can't be downplayed. It has such beautiful opulence. It had such an attractive allure. The homes, well furnished, full of china sets, women wearing satin dresses full of diamond necklaces, pearl necklaces, the men wearing silk suits, diamond chains, gold chains, I should say. I would have bought a diamond chain for myself personally, you know what I mean? But anyway, back to the documentary. I think the important question to ask is, how did this happen in a Jim Crow era, peak KKK era, peak racial segregation era? How did this microcosm create itself of Black Wall Street in Greenwood?
But the event that truly spurred on the city's dynamic growth was the discovery of the Ida Glen oil range in 1905.
Once oil was discovered, Tulsa absolutely skyrocketed. There were 1,000 people here in 1900. In 1910, there were 10,000. In 1920, there were 100,000 people here. Boosters called it the Magic City because it just showed up overnight.
The forest of derricks that sprang up were soon producing more than 2,000 barrels of oil per day. By the time it was admitted to the Union in 1907, Oklahoma led the nation in oil production. The wealth oil generated went mainly to the whites who owned the oil wells. But blacks also benefited as the money trickled down.
As Tulsa boomed, Black Tulsa boomed too. But the city, like the rest of the state, was also under Jim Crow laws, segregation laws. So while black people could work in jobs throughout town, they couldn't live anywhere in town, nor could they shop anywhere. So as a result, a number of enterprising young black entrepreneurs started to create a business district.
In 1905, the Greenwood district gets its first business, a grocery store on the corner of Greenwood Avenue and Archer Street. From this humble start, Greenwood soon flourishes into the vital, exciting center of African American life in Tulsa. By 1921, it is a place of limitless opportunities, both economic and social.
See, strangely, the perfect scenario for a microeconomy in Greenwood, where the racial segregation allowed space, number one, and also the necessity of buying goods. And that oil economy, that petrostate that was Oklahoma, which happened in the early 1800s, allowed them to have a strong dollar, which all those black former slaves would go there and work for the whites as domestics. But because they were paid well and handsomely paid, they had requirements. They had the need to, and the facilities, to buy more things for themselves, furnish their home, buy good food, look after themselves, have luxuries like hotels, want to go to the theater. They had an income that could stretch and be utilized for that. And something I don't want to forget to mention is that due to these factors, the black townsfolk lived in somewhat peace. It was no utopia, I'm not trying to say that, but they caused very little trouble. So the ire and the vitriol from the KKK, for example, didn't happen there. And something important to say is that typically, a lot of lynchings happened in the poorer states, where the economic suppression of the state itself allowed the poorer and middle class whites to focus more of their vitriol onto the blacks that they felt that were stealing their jobs or just had misplaced anger that they wanted to place it onto someone.
They found that African Americans were more likely to be attacked when whites' access to privileged and scarce resources, whether economic, social, political, or otherwise, were challenged. It could be food, jobs, political offices, land, or women. Whenever whites felt their position was under threat, the rate of lynching increased. Furthermore, lynchings also increased in frequency in counties with higher percentages of African Americans, where the perception of threat was more pronounced. Lynchings were twice as likely in cotton-dominant areas. For poor whites then, lynchings were a response to the economic threat of black competitors, whereas for landowning whites, violence could prevent the threat of any coalition between poor whites and blacks. The peak of the lynching era coincided with the decline in demand for king cotton in the 1890s. As cotton prices rose and the situation improved, lynchings fell, until the post-World War I period when cotton prices again fell.
Greenwood, quite the opposite, due to its economic bustling society, didn't have that problem. However, the eyes of envy were not too far lurking behind.
Black folks were rich here, basically. They lived very good lives.
Many of them, yes. Yes, which caused some envy and anger among white people who commented, how dare those Negroes have a grand piano in their house and I don't have a piano in my house.
1921 rolls around. What happens?
Some type of confrontation between blacks and whites was inevitable because of the racial climate at that time, because of the presence of the Ku Klux Klan in almost every aspect of our society.
But the high level of home ownership in Greenwood made Tulsa's Black District distinctive.
Now, for some white people, a black person with any wealth, then as well as today, is something that created jealousy.
Race relations in Tulsa were poor in the early 1900s. The KKK had an enormous presence in Oklahoma and in Tulsa particularly.
You see, racial riots and systemic racism and Jim Crow was prevalent. And these racial riots were happening all over the USA, all over the South. And it had escaped Oklahoma and Greenwood for a while. However, those racial tensions, they were bubbling over the surface. And sadly, due to the success of Greenwood in a strange way, it will, I think at times, and this is just my assessment, that the townfolk there forgot the context in which they were really living, because they lived in a bubble. And then the incident of Dick Robinson and Sarah Page allowed itself to happen.
But on this particular day, May 31st, 1921, a young black male named Dick Rowland, who worked as a shoe shine boy in downtown Tulsa, went into the Drexel building where he had been given permission to get water and use the restroom. There was a young white girl named Sarah Page who was an elevator operator. And Dick Rowland every day would go into the elevator with Sarah Page. On this particular day,
many disparaging reports about what happened in the bathroom, what happened on the elevator, sorry.
The story of the massacre was recently told in HBO's series, Watchmen.
They did a superb job of recreating Greenwood before the riot.
The events in Tulsa started on May 30th, 1921, with an altercation between an African-American shoe shiner and a white female elevator operator.
We don't know what really happened. He might have tripped and fallen onto her when he entered the elevator. We don't know. But the next day, the Tulsa Tribune, which was the city's afternoon daily newspaper, instead portrayed this unknown incident as an attempt, an interracial rape attempt by this young man, Dick Rowland. It also ran an editorial entitled "To Lynch a Negro Tonight" on the editorial page, essentially calling for a white lynch mob to take Rowland out of the jail at the top floor of the county courthouse and lynch him. Within a couple of hours, you have a lynch mob growing outside the courthouse, first 100, 200, 500, perhaps 1,000 people ultimately.
Many different reports. There seems to be a report that says, hey, he fell over and grabbed her dress and fell. There's reports that he stepped on her foot. There's also a rumor that has got no substantial evidence, but a rumor that they had a personal relationship there. One thing that we know, she never pressed charges in the end. However, at the time she said she was assaulted, and the newspapers helped pushed that point and went a bit further.
How did the black community respond to that demand to lynch this young man?
They were willing to risk their lives. They knew that they would be risking their lives to help defend Dick Rowland. And thousands of whites gathered in front of the courthouse. A white man approached a black man with a gun. He said, "What are you going to do with that gun?" He said, "I'm going to use it if I have to."
The two men argued. There was a struggle over the gun. It fired. The white resident was shot. All hell broke loose.
Now, as you can see, supported by some of the police, supported by some of the townfolk and the neighboring whites around, they flooded the city and overwhelmed them at the court gates and overwhelmed them by the barriers at Greenwood.
Blacks retreated to the Greenwood district where they set up a barrier at the railroad tracks and were able for a short time to keep whites from invading their community. But because they were so outnumbered and outgunned, whites eventually broke through the railroad tracks and invaded what was home to Black Wall Street, the Greenwood district.
This was the result. 35 city blocks of the black neighborhood burned to the ground.
And eventually dragged them out and burned them and beat them and shot at them. You see, the fire itself seems to be, and reported, it's not fully confirmed, but reported that it came from something that can only be described as airstrikes, bombs, nitrogen bombs, being dropped from the sky.
What is worse, survivors say they remember death not just in the streets, but raining down from the sky.
Many of our race riot survivors have commented that they remembered seeing planes flying overhead, dropping bombs, dropping nitroglycerin bombs.
Mrs. Hazel Smith Jones is believed to be the last living survivor in Tulsa. She's 97 years old.
My daddy wasn't at home, just the kids and mama. They came and got us.
Was it white people from the city?
At Cattle Street Fairground. And we was there for about 2 or 3 days.
To the fairgrounds?
And my dad didn't know where we were.
Did your family want to leave?
My mother, you know, with all this stuff going on, she thought it might have been safer with them taking us out there and being with more people.
Everyone called it a race riot. The opinion piece in the newspaper condoned it, calling Greenwood Niggertown.
See, many people disparaged that. However, seeing what happened to Oklahoma, Greenwood after that, it seems to be true, and there was some sort of attempt after to form martial law, gain control of the city, and it seems to be as well that they won a Supreme Court justice case. However, the damage was irrespectively done and never undone.
And sort of systematically, building by building, house by house, the white mob would loot and then set things on fire. And by the end of the day, Greenwood was gone, whereas the black population was now being arrested and held under armed guard in internment camps throughout the city.
The city was forever changed.
The riot was national news. In fact, it was international news. It was on the front page of the New York Times, the front page of the Times of London. And what happened is that the white city fathers and businessmen and government leaders realized that they had a public relations problem, that Tulsa was being portrayed as this lawless city where train travel was interrupted and whatnot. And so a conscious decision was made that we're going to sweep this under the rug, and that's exactly what they did.
Do you consider it a riot?
No, ma'am, it was really murder. It was a massacre. My grandmother was awakened at night and just told to run. Just get up and run. And they ran. She was only 9. They ran for days. She got mixed up from her family and lost in a chicken coop.
Calling it a riot was convenient for a city run by whites. There's no statute of limitations for murder, but there is for a riot. For the black victims, it was devastating.
They never received any type of justice for losing their loved ones, for losing their homes and the businesses that they worked so hard for, that they built from the ground up.
Every insurance claim from the Greenwood neighborhood was denied. The claims totaled about $2.7 million. Black Wall Street did recover, but never to its former glory. Do you think life is better for black folks in America now?
Yeah. Some places, yes, some places not.
At the time, they claimed that only 30 people had died, but it seems to be a post that 75 to 300 people have died. even since then, people believe the number is more and greater. And if you look at what happened after with the people, the black townfolk living in Red Cross tents due to the houses being burnt down, the houses being looted, the businesses being looted and burnt down as well. How many people died on a knock-on effect due to that? Sadly, the great doctor, the great surgeon I mentioned, A.C. Jackson, died. The black owner of the hotel, the biggest black owned hotel at the time, he himself also had to leave and became a lawyer. Many died, many suffered.
Ironically, it wasn't talked about in the African American community as much as well too. The riot was such a horrific, terrible event that, like as with Holocaust survivors, there were some members of the riot generation who said, we're not going to tell this story to upset our children. So it was really suppressed for a long time.
However, I didn't do this episode just to highlight that story. I didn't just do this episode to show America's dirty past and how it always constantly has a history of hiding its dirty history. A lot of documentaries have spoke about that. A lot of documentaries have mentioned that, and a lot of people who do a documentary on the Tulsa, Oklahoma incident mention how this has been hidden from the curriculum, hidden from the world, and it's a great stain on America. Some people call it the greatest racial riot ever to take place. I did want to highlight some of the beautiful stories, the opulence that happened in Oklahoma, the industry of black people, the creativity of black people when given the space to do that. But there's also some harsh lessons to learn. And what are those lessons? The first one is the power of black solidarity and support.
In turn, the Greenwood Blacks saved their money, invested in their communities, and started their own businesses. And with those businesses came an opulence unheard of. It's said that on Sundays, the women wore satin and diamonds, and the men wore silk and gold chains.
I don't think this gets mentioned enough. We don't see enough examples of it. You see that bustling, imaginary country of Wakanda in Black Panther. We all see it. We all kind of like see it as a dream. It does seem like a Disney World fairy tale. We forget that there's been moments, peaks of when it could happen. And Greenwood was one of the few examples of that. Greenwood was an example of when it is allowed a space, it can happen. You see, in the UK, we had something called Black Pound Day. And this happened in the peak and the height of the protest of George Floyd. However, since then, I'm not gonna lie to you, look, there ain't really much going on about it. It's not something that happens, it's not something that's celebrated a lot. However, the concept itself is great. And ideas are greater than the people that administer. And I wish more often, and that's my aim today, is to show how that concept of Black Pound Day, you can make it a Black Dollar Day, you can make it a Black Euro Day. We should adopt that more. And it starts with a very small and tangible step. It's nothing big.
Pause.
Oh, that was crazy.
I said, yo, you said, hey, yo, my nigga.
Yo, the way you said it was crazy.
Just support black-owned businesses. If you see a black-owned hair shop, try it out. If you see a black-owned restaurant, try it out. If you see a friend of yours that's black, starting a business, selling products, giving out content, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Support it. Why not? Why not? Why fucking not? You see, what is shown there, that microeconomies, especially when localized, can create something bustling and successful for everyone around. Something that was said in the documentaries was the dollar went around 36 times. 36 times before it left the black community. For how long have we been talking about the dollar, the pound, doesn't circulate around the economy enough? How many people mention that the Jewish dollar circulates around the Jewish community 7 times?
The power of the black dollar and why black wealth matters. At the end of the day, man, we talking about the dollar that's in your pocket. So you got to ask yourself, what exactly are you doing with it? And more importantly, how are you spending that dollar? Are you supporting people that look like you? Because the statistics are going to show that the dollar is going to leave the black community in less than 6 hours. Listen to that. That's crazy, because in the Asian community, the dollar's going to stay in there for about 28 days. in the Jewish community, it's gonna stay in there for about 19 days and about 17 days in the white community. That's problematic, man, because the black buying power is over $1 trillion. But only 2% of that, only 2 cents on the dollar, is actually being reinvested back into black-owned businesses.
Before it's allowed, before it goes outside of its community. How many times? And we've seen an example and we've seen what happens. See, successful blackness will always attract the envy and hatred of white supremacy. You see, white supremacy, people hate when I say this, but white supremacy is a power structure. It's beyond the KKK. It's beyond Jim Crow. It's beyond even slavery. It is a power structure. Economics allows the power structure to reign. The economics and the resources keep those few people at the top. An important factor to mention as well is that is why there's a lot of pushback from white people about the term white privilege, because they don't feel privileged by that power system. Although what they may fail to realize is that they resemble more the people at the top of the power system than not. However, it's a power system. Racism, systematic racism, is about power. It's about control. It's stopping people that have been once oppressed eventually rising to the top. There is a fear, a great fear, again, Art of War, 48 Laws of Power. The oppressed eventually become the oppressor.
You are dead drunk.
I don't actually know if that's from 48 Laws of Power, but it's a good quote. It's a really good quote. And I think that's one of the many reasons why the power structure allows systematic racism to still reign so supreme, and why the eye and envy of hatred of anyone who's successful and black still reigns. Look at it like this. Who are the people that have been truly cancelled?
This is not me. I'm fighting for my life.
In society today. I know people may mention Harvey Weinstein or J.K. Rowling. However, their work is still largely produced. They're largely consumed. No one's boycotting Harvey Weinstein-owned films. No one's boycotting Harry Potter at all, in fact. But if you look at artists that have been boycotted and their music have been displayed,
you're killing me, man! This is not about music!
what race are they? I'm not saying what they did was right. I am totally against it. All right? I want to make that clear. I'm just saying there isn't a fair treatment here. And before you say films are very different to songs where they're more personable, da-di-da-di-da, wasn't Harvey Weinstein deliberately using his films as a form of manipulation to harass and rape women? Is it just an artist that makes the song? Isn't there a producer? Isn't there a label behind it? Just factor that in. Just factor that in. I ain't telling you to listen to him. I ain't telling you to do any of that. I didn't even say his name intentionally.
This camera on me?
Yes, it's on.
That's stupid. Use your common sense.
Because I'm not supporting anything he does. I'm just saying, look at that. And my final point. When you think of a successful black person, who are the few names that come to mind? Jay-Z, Obama. Obama was in the presidency for 2 terms, and what came after him?
Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's
you
the
mind?
answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
Whatever you think of Trump, whatever you believe about Trump, he deliberately played on racial and xenophobic tendency. And how was that space allowed to grow? See, at the peak of hope, when black people thought, hey, maybe racism has come to an end, maybe systematic racism has died. I felt like that when Obama was around.
I got that Obama water. Change the way you hydrate, brother.
Yo, little man, hey, check it out. I got commemorative plates, 2 for $20. How many you need?
I'm cool.
Man, can you believe it? In a few days, we're gonna have a black president. Aren't you excited, little man?
We found, once he left, that racism had bared its ugly head again. That point I made about successful black people and the eye of envy and hatred surely following it behind is there. They also have to deal with ostracization, not just from the white spaces in which they work in, but the black spaces in which they're from, feeling alienated from both. It's a hard place, slightly privileged place, but a hard place. Something, again, Spike Lee spoke about and referenced in his movie Bamboozled. You see, the concept, the ideas, I mentioned this earlier, but the concept and ideas are greater than the people themselves, even sometimes the administrators of the ideas themselves. See, white supremacy, racism lives beyond the KKK, lives beyond that. It lives in the power structure. It lives in over-policing of black areas. It lives in mass incarceration of black people compared to their white counterparts. It lives in the structure of poor treatment by black midwives on black women, poor healthcare in black communities, poor teaching in black societies and communities. I'm not trying to beat this point over the head. I don't even want to sound preachy, but I just want to say this point of where many of the documentaries say, hey, this is such a great shame that we don't speak about what's going on here. It's way deeper than that. The lessons that are supposed to be learned from what happened in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, are deeper than America's dirty past and its constant need to hide its dirty past. It's deeper, way deeper than that. It's a story about black solidarity. It's a story about white envy. It's a story about stay away from white women.
And so you go and get a cave bunny.
I'm kind of joking, but someone had to say it. Someone had to say it. It's a story about power and white power structures and how far they will go to protect themselves. You see, some of the policemen that let the other town folk and the neighboring town folk in were former Klansmen. Not every documentary covered that, you know. Not everyone, most, but not everyone. There are so many details that are missed out. There are so many points in the story that are missed out. It's a grand shame. It's a grand shame. And I know some people may say, and I just want to close with this point because I did forget to mention it before, that some of the envy, some of the hatred that comes to black successful people comes from black people. And you can put into the comments, I'm here for it. Have a debate. Things that you thought I missed out. But I just want to make this point, that the hatred and envy comes a lot from black people as well. I want you to do me this one favor and just look at the general perception of black people and blackness and black communities. Who controls the media? Who controls the media? Who owns the media? What do they look like? And ask yourself this: do they, the community of black people, have a real control over their own perception? How many black-owned media companies do you even know? We had BET for a bit, and maybe you would understand why the perception of blackness and black communities are so bad by black communities. Crabs in a barrel. No excuse, need to do better, and that's what this story is about. The power of black solidarity. But just bear that in mind when that's your go-to response. Remember the context in which we live in. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you've made it to this point, you are one of the 5% that not only finish what they do, but finish my episode. So well done to you. You're going to be a very successful person. God bless you. Put into the comments what you would love me to talk about, what you think I should talk about, things you think I missed out, things you learned from this documentary commentary episode that I've done. I will do more in the future. I can't wait to hear from you guys soon. I'm out. Peace.
Believe differently.
Love differently. Be of different sex or skin and be punished.
we sing this song to one another. The oppressed become oppressors.